Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. Today we have a breakdown of what I have learned from Dorge in 2022, kind of co-hosting this podcast with him. I've learned so much more than we can even cover in this podcast, but these are kind of the most impactful things that I have learned from him this past year. How to get the best possible arrow flight for deer hunters, right? We're all deer hunters here, and we want the best equipment we can have. And here is how to get the best performance out of the best equipment you have. So before we get into the podcast, man, we've had so many exciting things happening here at Exodus. If you've missed out on the live stream we just had last week, we released the all-new Exodus Rival cell camera. It is a budget-minded cell camera that you can buy in volume and run in volume. It is a super feature-rich cell camera, all packed into a really small profiled camera for a great price. And as always, it's backed by our no BS 5-year warranty. So you're getting a cell camera guaranteed working on a tree for 5 years at a low cost of $180. If you break that down per year, this is a $36 a year cell camera compared to a lot of the competitors offering a 1-year warranty on a $170 camera. You do the math there. Tons of advantages going with the Exodus Advantage. If you want to learn more about the Exodus Rival, head on over to the website. They are for sale now, pre-sale. We're going to be shipping these cameras out in early February. If you want to save some dough on the Exodus Rival, use the code LAUNCH at checkout and you will get a savings of 17% on that camera. On the camera itself, it's about $30, and you can also use that code on the Rival and SB18 bundle. And if you're going to be running cell cameras, you should be running external power. Also, guys, in this episode of this podcast, we're talking a lot about the technology behind how to make an arrow fly better. If you want the technology that we talk about here, we have the Exodus MMT arrows tailor-built for your hunting scenario, your hunting bow. Everything that you need in a arrow, you're going to get it with the Exodus MMT. So go to the website, try those out. If you're tinkering this year with your arrow shafts and you want to learn some new things and you want to dive into what we've been covering here in the Deer Gear Podcast, get you a set of the Exodus MMTs. And if you've been wanting a micro shaft out of Exodus MMT arrows with the same technology, that is coming down the pipeline too. So with all that being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoy this podcast with Dorge and I. If you're headed to the Great American Outdoor Show next week, we will be there in booth 927. Stop by and see us, see the arrow shafts in person, see the new Exodus Rival in person. And until next time, we will talk to you soon. All right, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. Today's going to be a fun one. I'm sitting down with Dorge this morning. It's January 18th as we record this. We wrapped up the year 2022. Dorge and I kind of co-hosting this podcast together, and the feedback's been really well. And today we're going to cover what I think are the most impactful things that I've learned from Dorge last year, being his co-host of this podcast. Dorge, you up for that?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
Well, before we get all the way into this, your deer season is over, correct?
Yep. As of Sunday, and I only got 2 so far.
So not the season you were after, or are you pleased?
I'm okay for what I did. Did I see anything I really want to shoot? Not in front of me this year. I know there's a few big deer where the public land I hunt, but I haven't seen any of them in front of me. Yeah, I saw a few 8, 9, but they're all 120. Do we really need another 120? No. I mean, but you know what? Button bucks are good eating, but I haven't found any decent one besides the one I thought it was a doe, but that's okay. The foot's good.
Yeah, you can't get much better eating than that.
Oh yes, especially seeing you in Illinois, we can get those 130-pound button buck. Dave Murray out of New Jersey, he would hate that. He got those 70-pounders.
Oh,
those
yeah.
the size of dogs.
Oh yeah, my season. I still have a few weeks here. I haven't hunted since I've been back from Iowa. Really, just been.
You should be really hunting it hard because right now, you know, believe I have seen bucks mounting doe on December 5th.
Oh yeah.
So the third rut is really coming in. A lot of people don't believe it happens. I actually in 4 years ago, we saw one on February 7, 2020. So for those who have long seasons, you never know.
Yeah. Every 28 days, if a doe's not bred, she's going to come back into heat. So
yeah, remember if the doe was bred in February, when do you think the fawn's going to drop?
Yeah, it's whatever 200 and whatever the
gestation 100 something. That means the fawn is drop in say
July.
Yeah. So when is the fawn going to get in heat? That's the reason, my good buddy got to see some big deer downtown Chicago. Yep, he saw two.
Yeah. Yep.
Too bad. Hunting season is over.
Yeah. Well,
for me,
I've been just spending my time kind of recapping the year and what I found. I had a lot of great success with the new Exodus MMT arrows this past season. I was actually testing out a 204 shaft all year, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But
sure. I mean, just like every single size has its benefit and downside, but we just need to understand what you're after. That's the main key. It's like when is a truck better than a car? The fact is that sometimes they are not. We just need to understand what you're after.
Yep, 100%. I think that's something that we're going to get into here. But the probably one of the things that struck me, I didn't know this was the case, and I think it's a misconception throughout the entire industry, and that is that the straightness of your arrow doesn't really matter. It's more about how you build the arrow. Let's cover that topic a little bit.
Sure. Actually, that is one of the topics I have discovered. Okay. Because back in the days when I'm doing network and integration consulting, I always say whatever arrow is the most expensive in the market is the one I bought. And usually there's a straightness. I say straight must be the most important thing. But you find out it is like the same ideal concept. You buy the most balanced round tires. Does it mean that you drive it perfectly? No. It's the mounting company and how they mount to the rim, how they mount into the car. Those are actually more important. See, a lot of people do not understand. Shaft is only one single component of the entire arrow. When people ask you, what's the most important component of an arrow? I say every part. Because they say, no, some part are more important. I say, try without that part.
That's fair.
Yeah, because people say, I'll say, what part of your face beside your hair you were willing to give up? That's the whole deal. Yeah. And you know what? Why is shaft? Because everybody thought it is the main backbone. Just like, your body without your backbone, your arm and legs are useless. Sure. So is arm and legs useless? No, without arms and legs, you can't move. I mean, yes, you can go back to the old way of crawling on the floor like a worm, but that's not the point. See, the strictness of the shaft is simply saying how well that specific tubing is made. I mean, to say a stricter shaft is a better shaft, it's not a bad statement. It's not a wrong statement. It is, but it's not a critical statement. Because, well, as we will discover, if you build an arrow 1,000 strictness and build an arrow with 8,000 strictness, if you build it correctly, with the current ability of most people who shoot 120 yards, you can't tell. So is a 1,000 better than 8,000 strictness? Answer is yes, but this is a big but. Are you willing to, after you pay for that strictness, what are you going to do with it? Because if you do not spine it correctly and you have paid a 1,000 strictness and your arrow and fletches off by, say, 30% off spine, you must all don't bother. Especially the higher the let off it is, the more important the spine alignment becomes. So now the real question is that after you build a 1,000 strictness, but you don't spine align it, you must well don't bother. Or how concentric is the component in the front? How precise is your field point from field point to field point match weight? So in other words, you need to think through the same process as people reload guns. What part of the reloading is not important? Answer is none. Because any part you give up, you give up the accuracy you original asked for.
Sure.
So again, how important strictness is? Well, actually, I would say if you have no ability to build, then the only judgment you have now is strictness. So strictness is the most important. If you have ability to build, you know what it is asking for, you have the knowledge to build, then strictness is not important, especially if you don't shoot over 120 yards. You did hear me say 120 yards.
What about the argument that we get a lot to that statement is it matters when you're shooting a broadhead. Does anything change when you put a broadhead on the end of it? Does the straightness come into play more?
Actually, no. The broadhead, the strictness have actually less to do with a broadhead fight than a spine alignment, especially if the broadhead is not spine aligned. Now, remember, the larger the size of the broadhead, the less port it has, the more aerodynamic it's going to get. That means the initial launch cycle, when it passes the node, the higher and lower the magnitude and the angle of attack of the broadhead blade becomes. So how do you want to align it? You want to align it perfectly with the spine if you shoot a two-blade and it's north to south, which is 12 to 6 o'clock, because at that launch cycle, you want the least amount of aerodynamic resistance on the broadhead. So the strictness of the arrow have zero to do with the broadhead. Nothing.
Sure. Right. Yep. And then I think the reason why most people don't understand that is what you kind of touched on in the beginning, is because when you go to buy a 1,000 straightness arrow versus 6,000 straightness arrow, the price is so much different. But if you guys listening recall, one of the things that Dorge taught me was that the process to build those arrows is the exact same. The material used is the exact same. The only difference is the batch that those arrows get set in. So you'll have
Correct.
Arrows that are batched in 1,000 straightness, arrows that are batched in 6,000 straightness, same exact material, same exact build process, but you're paying a lot more just because whoever built them took the time to batch them in a different batch.
Well, actually, let me go back into the exact how the 1,000 strictness measured. Okay, based on the industry standard, which nobody agrees. But I'll tell you, for the three main manufacturers, which I shall not name, this is what they do. They support the arrow 28 inch apart. That's a piece of laser going down in the center. You rotate the arrow one full turn. If the laser come back, reaction of the reflection of the laser is 1 to 1,000, that's called the 1,000 strictness arrow. Now, what happens if the arrow is an S shape? That passing that 3 point exactly. The bulge of that S shape can be up to 15, 20,000. That arrow is still considered 1,000 because of that 3 point.
Right.
Now, I know Rick McKinney out of Carbon Tech, he looked his arrow from 7 points. That's the reason why Rick McKinney told you his arrows are 1.5 to 2,000 strictness. That's stricter than most 1,000s.
Sure.
So in other words, the number itself is really very questionable, and also how you hold it. Now, some of my more, access to technology and engineering, they grab a few of the arrow on the very back, like the 1,000 string arrow. They clamp it on the lay and then hold it and turn the front. That itself, all you know about 1,000 strictness, that can be 15, 20,000.
Yep.
That's so ridiculous. It's not even funny, because remember, there's another thing. A lot of people, when they put an arrow together, the arrow are measured from center 28. So remember, the arrow is 32 inch long.
Yep.
28 is 2 inch on each side. So in most cases, another thing is that a lot of people cut arrow from the back, okay, or from the front. In most cases, that's the reason I always buy shaft. I cut the arrow at least 1 inch from the back, because that's where most of the mandrels are pulled. If anybody understands mandrel, when you pull the mandrel, it's a hydraulic puller. That means the pulling end usually is larger and bulged. That's the reason you want to cut at least half an inch. Yeah, at least half an inch out, because the diameter is not good and the fiber is getting compressed. When anybody told you they fully cool the arrow before they do their job, I know how much it costs. Cost labor and time. I know I did it, but most people will not. And that's the reason when you look at some company, I would say, if I recall correctly, element pull from the front. That's the reason when you look at the element Typhoon, you can be as much as 207 in the front and 204 in the back.
Yep. And then I think so going into that, I think one of the realizations I had is I should stop paying so much attention to the straightness of the arrow and pay more attention to how concentric all of the inserts and how concentric the components fit inside of the arrow, because that's going to give you if the inserts are not concentric, you're going to have
Mhm.
you can have 1,000 straightness arrow and have your insert be off, and you're going to have a terrible result.
Correct. But see, in other words, with concentric, if you understand, just go into pure geometry, okay? People will say, well, the arrow is 8,000 strictness. If I perfectly centered my insert, I my insert 8,000 off with my CG 8,000 off. Now, let's go back to some what you call control chaos, as I always said. The entire arrow flight is a control chaos. You need to control as much element as possible. So the concentricity of the insert to the shaft, because you want to able to repeat it. That's where the magic is. If every single arrow was built slightly different, from arrow to arrow repeatability is gone, which is also a lot of time you see ASA, IBO, or even TAP, you got a few guys with a full arrow quiver. That's only about 2 arrow they trust, because those are the arrow for some unknown reason was built correctly or by chance.
So I think that's one of the first things that really struck me. The next thing that struck me, and it's because I had pretty intensive testing on it, was nock fit and arrow clocking. So these things kind of go hand in hand, but the thing that struck me more was how important how your nock fits and the relationship from the nock to the serving is for your arrow flight, and how the nock is built. So choosing the correct nock has a bigger impact on your arrow flight than you think.
Oh, yes. I remember in the early days, I bought so many arrows from so many places because I figured that if they weigh about the same, I even don't consider length an issue. Well, that's how, just think about it. I have made every single mistake that had been made and learned from mine. See, the good thing about me is that I don't mind making a mistake, but I only make it once. Yes, the nock fit is one of the thing that most people are amazed. That's the reason, we have find out we make the nock $10 for 7. It's not a cheap number. You can get similar thing with ridiculous price. You look at some company, they give you a bag of nocks for $6. I think it's pretty much the same thing as tires. Some people buy 30, 40 retread tires. Some people who really need the performance buy those expensive tires. When I say expensive, most people do not know tires can cost $2,000, $3,000. And then, of course, I live in farm country in Henry. You think how much you think those farm tractor tires cost? They are not even concentric, but they did the job. The tire, the tire to rim fitting is the same as nock to string fitting. And not to mention, I see a lot of people I think we did a full podcast on how important the nock fit is. And then that actually leads to the immediate next question. The direction of the serving to the nock will cause the nock to go left or right. Yes, at this moment, unfortunately, based on the technology and equipment we allowed, every single arrow that you come out the bow will turn left first. And if anybody have to argue with me, I say, this is academic. It's not even an argument. But if you want to argue with it, find a mirror. I think that's the best because it's proven.
Yeah, we did a lot of testing on that exact subject because we wanted to know. Well, for instance, the arrow vane 2, the way the airfoil is built on that vane, the arrow is going to turn right. It's going to spin to the right. However, when it's launched, it's going to come off the bow to the left, and then it's going to correct and go back to the right. And we wanted to know, does that matter? Does it make a difference? Do you lose anything when the arrow stalls out and then corrects? And everything that we tested was no. It's so minimal that it doesn't even matter.
So minimum. In other words, does it matter? Yes. from which point of view? If you shoot under, say, 100 yards, is there an energy difference in speed? Answer is that it may be, but so if you're shooting 60, say 65 pounds at 100 yards, you're supposed to, you launch at 280 feet per second. At 100 yards, you allow like 230. Okay, with it cocking incorrectly, you're now at 298, 229. Does it make a difference? Not in the fact of matters, not what you're doing. But yes, is that a difference? Yes, absolutely, there's difference. But does that difference matter to you? No.
Especially,
I mean, it's like,
especially in a bow hunting scenario where where a lot of people's max shot is 40 yards.
Correct. It's the same argument I have with my wife, which I will never win. It says she should never have about 80 pounds of stuff on the back of her car because she used more fuel. Because she's carrying 80 pounds more stuff. Does it matter? To me, yes. To her, no. Let's just say, for her, she sort of like to prove a point at the end of the year. That 80 pounds of stuff that she carrying in her car maybe cost her half a gallon of fuel for the entire year. Yes, that's half a gallon of fuel. The scientific me will say that's a difference, but the actual of every person, no.
It's 2 minutes. It's negligible. So
correct.
The point to that is too, like, that's what more people pay attention to. More people pay attention to arrow clocking and the direction of it rather than how their nock fits on the string, which in my opinion is more important.
Well, actually, see the nock fit itself, you can literally see it on a chronograph immediately. Okay, actually, but when I first launched Fire Nock S-Nock, which I tell the customer to put it on a 120,000 string, 112,000, and 110,000 string, and shoot it out of the bow and see the speed compared to, at that moment, he's shooting Carbon Express Maxima. We're talking back in 2009. Just the way the Fire Nock fits and release, that is average of absolutely 1 feet per second on a 280 feet per second bow. If that do not tell you anything, that's something you can see, something you can prove. And not to mention, you say at that moment, the broadhead is more controlled. Yes, because the moment when the nock leaves the string, just remember one critical fact. The moment the arrow leaves your bow, there's no more control. The moment your nock leaves the string, your arrow rest still have a tiny bit of control if you use the correct arrow rest. That's the reason. Those 2 points, the arrow rest and your nock, are the only 2 things you have for the entire launch cycle that you have control over. That means if you have you can do nothing on the entire arrow flight besides that 2 point of contact. How important is it?
It's very important.
That's the reason people pay a lot of attention to the arrow rest. But at the same time, I would hate to say 90% of the people don't know how to hold a bow. That's the reason they use drop away. If you look at all the professionals, none of them will they will laugh at you when you use a drop away, because that's the only control you have, and you want to shorten your control because you can't hold it right. Well, you know what? That's part of life, because not everybody like Levi Morgan can put in 3-4 hours a day on shooting. So you need all the help you can get. So we sort of like hide the important part and move on with what we can control. Is that wrong? No, that's not wrong. But just understand, this is what you give up. Yes, we have to give up things. That's part of life. It's just like when you go hunting, you're not working. You're not making money.
Yep.
But do we want to give up that? Yes.
Yeah.
At least for me.
I'm okay with giving that up too. Luckily for me, I get to kind of do a little bit of both. But anyways, not only will you see that difference in say speed on the chrono, the more control, the better your accuracy. So the single cavity, single mold nock with what's the Fire Nock made out of?
Macrolon. It's a virgin flow macrolon. Virgin flow is very important because anybody would know molding. Plastic is not metal. Plastic is in a certain extent recyclable, but not really, because when you melt the plastic of fuel, you introduce a lot of impurities and the carbonation of the polycarbonate. So The moment you do virgin flow, you are talking the original design characteristic of the polycarbonate flowing into a cavity. Now, there's another thing. Polycarbonate nocks are behave like insects. They have what I call exoskeleton. The outside is the hardest and the inside is forever soft. So the curing process from knock to knock, from cavity to cavity is where your problem is. So having a single cavity, single mold, virgin flow will give you the most considered knock to knock. Because remember, we talk about the consistency from one arrow to the other is the most important. So yes, if you use some other veins besides mine, the first thing and the best thing you can do is to weight them. Because most veins in the market are not weight consistent. So our knocks, inserts, few points. I mean, yes, if you got better machine, you're going to see the variance. When you start stacking the variance, the numbers can get phenomenal.
Sure. Yep. And then one last thing, I don't want to harp too much on knocks here, but the design of the fire knock versus a lot of the competitors is the flare at the end. So you don't have
Correct.
the end of the knock coming back in. Was you slow that down, what you see is
no, actually, it's not slowing that down. What you do?
No, when you slow the footage down, like when you shoot
yes.
and you slow it down, what you see is how much the string is contacting each side of the knock before it is released.
Correct. I mean, I will use one knock that I know, the old Mako knock. The Mako knock will after you release, the string will drag on the entire knock prong before it fly out. This is where the importance of putting the knock left and right. If you notice, all 5 knock have left and right indicator. Because when you flow polycarbonate, the left and right indicator, remember, that's the only thing you have control over. And the release of the knock from the string is the most critical part when the arrow leaves the bow. If that is not consistent, now remember, we're talking a few thousands, but just remember, it's less than a few thousand. It's like 1/3 of 1,000. But you're dealing with an arrow. When you increase your error, remember, you need to treat it like a mirror image of what you're throwing. Very much like how you remember the old camera, you got a hole and then you got 2 crosses. The moment you increase the error, when you increase the distance, remember, from your knock to your throat, that's the starting point, all the way to impact. If you increase 0.3 thousandths, it may equal to 8 inches at 120 yards. You did not hear me wrong. Yes, it's that much off. So how important is the knock fit? Because that's the only control you are. How much of the only control are you willing to give up is the real question, isn't it?
Right. Yep. So as you can see, knock fit, extremely important, more important than the way the arrow clocks initially off the arrow. So there's 3 more kind of points that I want to cover here. Number one out of these 3 is the dynamic spine and the first dynamic bend being the most critical point to building the arrow. Let's dive in on that.
Well, first of all, we need to understand the moment when we move from aluminum arrow to carbon arrow, the arrow no longer flex in the neutral plane. That means imagine if you spine the arrow in the aluminum arrow, which is your heavier part, which is your seam, which they call it, okay? Imagine your seam is at 6 o'clock. The weakest part of the arrow on the spine part is the 12 o'clock. That's what traditional aluminum arrow does, which make them so good because they are so predictable. But the problem we have is that aluminum arrow have metal fatigue built in. Just like I learned from Rod White, the Olympic gold medalist, you got 70 to 75 shots out of that.
Out of an aluminum shaft.
Correct. And people say, I shot an aluminum shaft for like 2,000 times. I say, just remember, you're also not shooting the right spine. Most people shoot 22, 19, and so on. The spines are way higher than what they should.
So when the spine's breaking down, it's actually
changing it, because it maybe you start with the say, if the arrow is supposed to be say 300 spine, after a certain time, it can be as low as something like a 350, 340. Well, most people don't know the difference. So I can't say much to it. Now, when you go into the first generation carbon arrow, like the Beemans, they are extruded carbon. What does that mean? That means they put a hopper of carbon fiber, they push it through a mold, and then into a tube, all the carbon fiber are straight. Those arrows, how many spines you have? We have found as much as 7. That means there's 7 different bending points the arrow can. Are they linear? Answer to them is yes, but they flex through the neutral plane. No, they don't. Can they? Yes. Just like if you throw a rock at say 5 feet from you in a circle, what's the chance of they getting in? Yes, they will get in, but it's going to be pretty hard. So that itself is that now we're talking about the dynamic spine. Now this is where the real deal come in, because with that all the fiber, when you flex the shaft, that means under load. The word dynamic is actually when the arrow is under load. How would it flex? Answer is that your guess is as good as mine until you test it. In that case, is the spine linear? For the Beeman extruder shaft, 90% is yes. Can it be no? Yes, extrusion, the fiber can go sideways. Now, the moment we go into the first true carbon shaft, which I consider gold tip build, which is made of up to 6, but as low as 4 layers of carbon. They all are not straight lay, because I remember last conversation with Marvin is that the lay can be a little bit off, because they need to be. Because like the first layer putting it down, say, I'm just using a number, okay? I don't want to give you exact manufacturing spec. Say you lay the first layer 15 degrees to your left. Then you're going to lay in the second layer to 15 degrees to your right. And then you go 30 degrees to your left. And then 30 degrees to your right. So you say, oh, the arrow will be totally straight because you have 15, 15, 30, 30, right? No.
You have more material on the second and fourth layer.
Correct. Every layer you lay on top is larger. So in other words, what's the resulting spine? Answer is that you have no idea. Nobody has. I tried to find some mathematician based on the formulas. You know what? It was a joke. It was even stupid to ask the moment I understand it. So how do we find a dynamic spine on a modern carbon shaft that is rolled? That means multi-layer roll with directional carbon. Answer is that the only to do is do a dynamic spine tester. See, a lot of people, they claim to be, okay, dynamic spine testers. What does that really mean? What it means is that we are using a machine, any form of machine, to give you the predictable result on how the arrow going to flex when it was under load. I tried many machines. I mean, the last machine I tried that worked well was the RAM. But if you look at my RAM testers, you'll be laughing. It looked like a freaking honeycomb. The reason for that, because which is also bring me to another thing, is that people say, oh, the arrow was spine tested and dynamically measured before it come out of the factory. Yes, that's really great if they do the job. Second, you said, do you ever shoot the shaft full shaft? And do you ever put insert and vein and nock on it? Because the dynamic span is the way the arrow bend under load. If that's the case, is the insert important? Is the vein important? Is the nock important? I mean, I always say that ideally is that we put the vein on the arrow and then test the dynamic spine. But that sort of defeat the purpose, isn't it? Because the vein is the final indicator of how we load the arrow. Yes, the dynamic span is based on the weakest part of the arrow. And yes, with every single arrow I tested, they are all flexed not linearly. They flex helixly. And then not to mention when they bend the arrow, there's 3 forces coming continuously. First of all, the arrow flex up and down. If you're assuming holding the back end tight, okay? The arrow also have torsion. That means the whole arrow twists to the left, to the right, and it's not consistent. And that's reason, that's another myth. Because see, they say, oh, this arrow turned to the left. That is if your nock is holding it. Because that means that the torsion is now to the left. That's on the up cycle. How about the down cycle? Oh, you should be opposite, isn't it? It is. But how opposite and how dynamic the arrow flexes? Because remember, we have multiple layers of carbon with different direction. So the entire flex is a compound helix, if you really want to go into it. Then you say, if that's the case, how would the arrow spin? It's spin a very type elliptical, orbital elliptical. Yes, it's worse than a satellite. That's how an arrow flies. So if you really look into this, if you don't call it a control chaos, I don't know what you're going to call it. So how do we actually find it? I found out the easiest way that I have discovered, which I have patented and built a machine called the PAPS, called a Professional Arrow Preparation System. You actually just put a load on the arrow after you cut it with the insert built into it, and the system will flex to the point and indicate which way is the weakest. So what I'm really doing is what is the weakest length or weakest point of the arrow when you apply pressure. Is this something better? Absolutely. If you're able to, like your shooting machine, and then Nocturne it after you do this, it'll be pristine perfect. Now, I mean, I have done so many tests with so many of the dealers that first question this. I have not failed once. I mean, we are talking some shooters that literally spend 2 days Nocturning a dozen arrow, and they give it to me and how he marked it. I said, did you put insert in it? He said, does it matter? I said, hell yes, it does matter. And say, well, based on this current condition, I will spine for you. So while using the PAP system, I did a dozen arrow in less than 2 minutes. And everybody, I'd say, of course, they hide the spine and don't let me see it. I don't need to see it. And it matched with whatever they did 100%. I mean, we're not talking some confidence. Yeah. So I'm pretty proud of their machine. And so far, anybody and everybody use their machine have saved them hours. I mean, after you do that, should you still Nocturne? I said, yes, because you're just saying about the arrow flex and out of the bow. But remember, when you shoot an arrow, you still have a human, which grabbing the bow, you can talk left and right. You cannot guarantee that the draw cycle of the bow with the nock travel is perfect, because you need to add all those variables to the arrow when they launch. Right. That's the reason a final Nocturne on an imperfect arrow, a bow and arrow setup is critical.
But it gets you a lot closer, saves you a lot of time. You don't have to.
I would say the moment your spine align an arrow shaft with a fixed with the bow, anything 45 yards, you're pretty much pinpoint accuracy.
Yep.
If you don't, you need to think about your grip, your bow tuning, your arrow rest. Those are coming in play.
Maybe the broadhead design, if it's a poorly designed broadhead.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even if it's a line broadhead would be. Because a lot of people spin broadhead, say, oh, look at it, how well it spins. Then it flies like a junk. You know why? Because the arrow, the broadhead is not meant to fly, or there's porting issue on the broadhead. Yep. I mean, that's a lot more factors than most people recognize. Just because something look good do not mean something fly good.
Yep. And that's how all of the Exodus MMT arrows are built on the PAP system. Saves the end user a lot of time in that, and it's going to give you a way better result. The biggest takeaway that I've had from that is the goal is to have every single arrow react the same exact way at launch. And if you don't have your arrows spined correctly, they're going to react in all different ways. And that's how you alluded to it earlier. A lot of people they'll go to a 3D tournament and they'll have 56 arrows in their quiver. And if you break 2 of them, the 2 that they always shoot, they're screwed because they don't fly the same. So the goal of the builds are to have the goal of the PAPs, the goal that everyone should be shooting for is to have every single one of your arrows that you're going to put through your bow react the very same way at launch.
Correct. Now, just think about it. For most of the instinct shooter or what your traditional bow shooter, or people who their life depends on they get food, how many arrows do they carry? 2. A backup shot. If you look at every single indigenous person who life depends on killing something, it's very seldom they carry 3 arrows. They always carry 2.
Yep.
Because those are the 2 they know exactly what they're going to do.
Yep. So the next point that kind of goes hand in hand is we're going to talk about one. So there's 2 factors here, but it's all within one main category. And that is the single most important thing that I've took away from everything you taught me is the faster your arrow recovers off the bow, the better performance you're going to have. And there's a lot that goes into that.
Correct. Actually, let me put a caveat on what you just said. If you use a modern compound bow with anything over 70% let off, the higher the percentage let off, the faster you want the recovery of the arrow be, because that's where the magic is. It is like if you drive a good fast sports car, do you want tire that is super hard? You won't put power down. You can't. That means if you have the high compound, high let off bow, and your arrow don't recover correctly on the spot of time, everything you bought is junk. That means if you buy an 85% let off bow, you throw a lower spine arrow on the arrow. You may have initial launch speed, your penetration suffered, your flight characteristics suffered, your loss of energy per signal loss suffers immensely. I mean, just like when the test that we had with Tony Warden on the Raven. Yes, the bow have 180 KE. At 100 yards, we projected it to be only 48% lost. Yes, but you still have over 90 pounds of KE on the arrow. But that's where a lot of people misunderstood. But then do you really want 92 KE if you decide to take that crossbow for Africa hunt? 92 KE is not enough to kill any of the big stuff. I mean, yes, you can put precisely, but then we're pushing in the whole arena of how precise you, I mean, how close do you want to be with it?
Right. You need a little bit of backup power there. And there's so many different things that goes into how an arrow recovers, how fast an arrow recovers, what makes an arrow recover faster, slower than others. And I guess this is where we can kind of talk about the diameter of the arrow and the wall thickness of the arrow. When again, talking about modern compound bows above 70% let off, the worst combination that you taught me is a 166 micro diameter shaft with super heavy FOC in the front. And there's a few reasons for that. And let's talk about just strictly talk about the diameter of the shaft, what happens at launch.
Yeah, we first of all, I did not invent these whole principles. We need to look at validity principles on two dynamics. We know that a solid rod actually will fail before a hollow rod. That's the first thing I got to take away when I learned physics. As the diameter increases, the two property, the hollow solid, get less. But at the same time, we go into wall thickness, because wall thickness is what a memory effect is. Because thicker the wall, the more the memory you got. I mean, it's the same thing with the bow limb design. The thicker the limb, the worse it gets. That's the reason we all see all the new bows will have wider limbs. I'm sorry, I'm diving into the wrong area. But in the cases, if remember, a spine of an arrow is based on all the combined fiber resist being bent. In other words, treat an arrow like a bridge. You put weight in the middle. If you can use the same material and you make the tube bigger, you're going to resist more. So in other words, the size of the arrow shaft, the larger we make it, the better off we are. That's the reason, I mean, I remember Tim Gillingham at one time, he built some half-inch diameter arrows. Is it shoot good? Out of his 31, 32-inch draw? Yeah. Not out of my friends who have a 26-inch draw. You look at that and say, now it's a real broomstick. But the fact is that the larger the diameter will help you, but you also make the wall extremely thin. That sort of hinder on the durability of a shaft. But then you need to look at it. Somewhere between all this is the optimum. And so far, in my personal opinion, I think 300 size is the absolute best. But most people just don't like the 300 size. Is the 246 better than a 300? I would say for 90% of people who do not want to invest in super expensive components and spend extreme amount of time building like a 204, 166, I think 246 is ideal. But if I should go back to shoot vertical bow, what size would I use? since I can pretty much sit there and build the way I want to build, I would say between 204 and 246. Those are the two sizes. But just for technical challenge, can I be 166? Sure, I can. But then you're putting so much more effort. You are increasing the weight of the arrow. Now, this is where the problem comes in. If you use ultra high modular carbon, the wall thickness of the 166 is going to be thinner because you are putting ultra high modular carbon, the resistive band, the higher modulation or in Western form, or just like in fishing, we call IM6, IM7, IM8. In the Japanese world, it's called the ton. You got the basic 24, 28, 32 ton, 38 ton, or even 40 ton. Those are the modulation of a carbon. So the higher the number, the higher the modulation, the more the resistant of bend is the material. So just like I can build a really thick wall fiberglass shaft, or I can build a really thin wall carbon shaft. The carbon shaft will react faster. It's going to less mass. It's going to less resistant to gravity. Now, that's the reason, look at the original thinner shaft like the Victory VAP. They use the ultra high modular carbon. But then the moment you go 400, 500 spine, you notice they add back fiberglass in it because it becomes too brittle. Now you got real serious memory issue. So if you like the 166 class, the 300, 350 spine is about the minimum you need before you start, in my personal opinion. Can you go lower? Well, nobody will stop you if you want to jump off a cliff. Well, you say, well, maybe you're just a cliff diver, you got parachute and everything, but that's you, not me. But for most of the common guy, the 166, I would say start at 350 spine and up. If you use ultra high modular carbon, but then you always have all the rest build issue. So somewhere between, you need to look at finance-wise, money-wise, result-wise, durability. What is the absolutely most beneficial shaft? I would say a 246, which is the reason that when Gold Tip make the first arrow, that's what they make, 246.
Yep.
Now, if you want it a little bit more durable and sacrifice a tiny bit of weight, the 204 is the ideal. Can you make 204 with the ultra high modular carbon? Answer is yes, but then you pay for it. Then you always increase the complexity of build. What's the benefit? You supposedly get a more durable shaft over 246. That's wind resistance is never an issue. We proved that if you shoot a 166 and a 2764 at 100 yards out of the bow with 30 miles per hour crosswind, if there's no vanes on it, they are the same. Yes. When I first tested, I was like, who's joking me? This stuff is huge like a log. But how come it's different when you shoot a bow and arrow because you got vanes? Vane is your biggest issue. And broadhead. When you fly in the air. Because what you need to think about it, the air is nothing more than a media. The moment you pass that media, you need to look at the cross-section of an arrow. When you move from a 166 to 2764, yes, it's a huge amount of bigger. But what kind of media are you flying through? Air. What does that media mean? Nothing. Not for 100 yards, not for 120 yards. There's reason the size of the arrow wind drift is zero difference. But I would tell you, the 166 with the spine that's below that do not recover, now you really got yourself in trouble because of the vane. The vane is making a gigantic impact. That's what the crosswind signature. That means when the arrow goes through air, when the wing is flapping all over the place. That's the reason front of center is so critical in this. The lower the front of center, the faster the air recover, the smaller the crosswind signature will be. Because the crosswind signature, that means how big is an area the arrow would affect when it goes through air.
How much displacement?
Correct. This is where the big deal is.
Yeah, and then there's that's where I wanted to go with this too, because everyone says, well, I want to shoot a 204 or 166 because it's less affected by wind drift. Well, your broadhead is bigger than the shaft and your vanes are bigger than the shaft. So like, what's the difference? The same argument for penetration. Well, the 204, the 166 has less surface area, so it's going to be less affected when it passes through the animal. Well, the broadhead created the hole.
Mhm.
How big is your shaft compared to the broadhead? It's way smaller. If you have a
Mhm.
broadhead that creates a path for you, creates the wound channel, your arrow is not touching anything anyway. So it
Well,
has.
actually, I'll give you one more because you imagine you're shooting 166. The moment the broadhead touched the shaft, and if the 166 is not recovered, the fixed 166 is bending. Now you're creating a huge amount of drag. And if you're, I mean, yes, this is the time that FOC have a lot of help as on impact, okay? But then at the same time, if your entire shaft is heavier, you have a string effect.
Yep.
Otherwise, you end up with a string effect, the whole arrow flex backwards.
Balance.
That's the reason when you see people say, I shot this broadhead at an animal with a quarter away, it go in 3 inches and it flipped and go in 3 inches. Yes, that's where your shaft is not straight.
Yep.
Because and how the broadhead caused the rest of the shaft to flex so badly, it behave a lever effect.
Yep. Yeah. To be extremely clear, we're not against using mass. We're not against having a heavier arrow shaft or GPI. It's where the weight is distributed on the arrow. The FOC being
Correct.
high is the bad deal here.
Correct. You need to think about it. When the arrow is in flight, if the weight is all the way in the front, the tail now have no control. It will start flapping left and right, up and down, or whatever. Now you really create a huge parachuting effect from the veins. But then if your broadhead is not correct, with the arrow flex and have anything, if the broadhead pick up any direction, I mean, I remember one time one of the guy who asked me to test some new broadheads. I say, this is not gonna go good. He said, don't trust me, this is gonna fly right. It's a 1.5 inch cut. I shoot out of my bow at a target that's 25 yards. The arrow was about 40 yards to my right, landed. No, I'm not joking. It was freaking insane. It come out from my bow within 4 inches, do a corkscrew, and then it landed 40 yards to my right. When he saw that, he say, what just happened? I say, because I got arrow vein. It spin the arrow and your broadhead catch wind. And then depends on which cycle the broadhead catch. The moment you catch it, it's off the center. There's no control.
Right.
When I show him, when I say, now look at my light, and I want to shoot it one more time. This time you fly straight up. It's just really more funny than you can imagine, his face.
Yeah. So on the same kind of topic here, the recovery, what you did to kind of speed that process up was the CTI, which is used
Correct.
in the MMT. So let's kind of talk about what that does to
Okay,
the front of the arrow.
Yeah, the CTI was actually I will go back a little tiny bit of history. What really happened is that when Scorpio come to me with the Gold Tip Laser 2 on a 420 feet per second arrow, the spine is too low. I say I need to increase the spine, and there's no arrow acceptable. At that moment, I say, you know what? Let's sleeve it and see what happened. I mean, I'm using the old method. If one's not enough, double it. So I put at that time, I believe I put in something like the Pro Hunter 300 because I got 298,000 OD. I put in the shaft. It shoot decent for a few times. And then I put a different length. I mean, I think at one time I put in a 27 inch, but I put in a 17 inch on a 22. Then I go into a 10 on a 22. Then I go to a 7.5 and then a 6 and go back to a 10. I found out for that, based on Gold Tip Laser 2, the absolute best was 10.5. And later, of course, I sit down and put some physics through it. It is about 45% of the entire length. That's the most maximum you can go. 42, 43 is where you can, if with the front of center. Then I also face another problem. Is that how do I make, and then they all shoot decent for a very short time because the glue between the carbon. Now remember, putting the tube in it is absolutely useless until you stabilize between the two tubes. What I was discovering is that it is really doing what you call a sine wave cancellation. but it's sectional. But that is the most important part, is sectional. So at the same time, I also lower the front of center by pulling the front of center away from the front. That forced the entire front of arrow to recover faster. The faster the arrow recover, the more faster it stabilizes, the more energy it can retain, which is why this becomes so useful. Because see, for all the new high let-off bow, the faster the arrow recovers, the more efficient it is. See, the whole idea is about efficiency. Just like, halfway through the deal, and then I think Tony Warden was the one who suggested that I put a carbon tube on the back and do on both ends. At first, I brushed him off because I think it's just a joke. But he said, let me build it for you. And then, of course, Dave Murray built one set too. They both told me it's freaking phenomenal. The problem that I told them, if you do that, you'll be great, but it's not going to be durable. The reason for that, because there's nothing holding the tube on the back. It's only the glue. Yep. So the gluing process becomes very, very important and very time consuming. I mean, I know I got a few dealers like Horse, like Adrian and also Jeremy out of X-Wing Custom. They're great in doing this. But I told them, you'd be crazy not to pay $70 for those guys who build you a dozen arrow. Because it's that much time consuming. How much would 2 hours your time cost to build a dozen arrow?
Right. So
let them do it for you because they have the equipment, they have the know-how. Can you do it mechanically? Absolutely. I did it. I bought a diaphragm machine. I bought an ultrasound cleaner. Well, that cost me what, $40,000 for the whole deal. And then I had to build plugs because then I can suck the tube with the glue into it. Yes, that's a lot of work, but is the result worth it? I mean, it's like every racing, every sports. If you go to the extreme, is that what you want? You pay for it. So yes, it's the arrow concept system, which is the CTI in the front arrow only. How much benefit are we talking about? I'll give you some numbers that you can actually chew on. On a 246, without it, is 16 yards, absolutely, for the arrow to recover. Yeah. Recovery. With the CTI in the front only, is 10 to 12 feet. Huge. If you look at it, that's 500 to 600% difference. If that is not enough for you to make a significant, yes, it absolutely immediately with result you can see that's not if and also but.
Yeah.
In the crossbow, it's even more dramatic. I mean, you literally
speeds are so high.
Yeah, the speed is so high, the power cycle is so high. And the faster you recover, the more you allow the vein to work, the more you allow the arrow to straighten out, the more you focus the energy on the broadhead because everything is straight now. Yes, I mean, it's not absolutely straight because it couldn't be. You still have the tight helical spin and all the rest of the stuff. But at least you minimize and you control the absolute chaos. The higher the let off, the more the chaos. That's the reason, I mean, I remember one time we were talking about an 85 to 80% let off. What's the big deal? It's only 5%. No, it's not 5%. It's 33%.
Yeah, the amount of holding weight that you have increases.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, that made a huge difference. And we did a whole podcast on that as well. That was the most beneficial thing I did all year was switch from 85 to 80%. I even on my tracks, I got 75%.
Oh, wow. And yeah, actually, if you do target, you'll find out that most of the target guy like the 65 more than anything else. Because I will tell you, I would like to see an ASA guy try to do a 90% let off and win.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be that good. I mean, can some of the guys do it? I don't doubt it. But you just be so much effort just to be in that shape.
Yeah, why do it?
Exactly. Just like you handicap yourself to win.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are, I mean, there's so much more that you've taught me. I guess time is certainly limited here. Is there anything else that you want to?
Well, I will add one because a few guys actually email and text me. They tell me, Dorge, since you talked about cams a few days ago, why don't you build a titanium cam over aluminum? It's so much lighter. I say, you forgot one thing. Titanium about twice the weight of aluminum. You say, what? Titanium is lighter. No, titanium is twice the weight of aluminum. Titanium is better. But when you look at aluminum in the cam class, which is 7,000 series aluminum, it's 82% strength of steel. It's about 200% less than titanium. But using titanium to make cams is stupid. Seriously. Aluminum is your best friend.
Just be too heavy.
Too heavy, The mask is going to be, I mean, if you really, really want to do something to really lower the cam, guess what? Magnesium is your friend. But then you better don't scratch it. You don't want your entire boat to go in flame.
Yeah.
All right. I think we got plenty for today.
Yeah, I think that was good. I think it kind of will hammer home some of the topics that we've talked about. People should be thinking about why their arrows didn't perform last year, how to make them better. So hopefully this helps anyone out. If you have any questions, as always, make sure you're getting a hold of Dorge and I. Tons of questions coming in, so we'll be covering those again in the Q&A podcast. But Dorge, thank you. Have a great day.
You're welcome.
I look forward to seeing you in Harrisburg.
Yep, me too. Bye. Safe travel.